You're tuned in to The Last Radio Show.
Hello and welcome to The Last Radio Show. I'm John Lynch.
I'm Jenn Reilly.
And this is a show where we talk about all kinds of stuff, all kinds of news, history, pop culture. And this is news and this is history because a little bit of news this past week. Former Vice President Dick Cheney passed away.
Right.
84 years old. Amazing that, first off, I felt like he was 84 years old when he was vice president.
For sure. I was just going to say that.
I did the math after I saw that, and he was only in his late 50s when he became vice president with George Bush, because it was 25 years ago. Right. So he's 84 now. He was 84 now. So I thought he was at least in his 60s or 70s when, later 60s, early 70s when he was vice president. But
yeah, he was part of that whole thing where everyone just looked old and for no reason at all.
We talked about that in the past, how people used to look older, and he was maybe the last of that group. But 84 years old. Had multiple, 5 heart attacks in his life. Right. So it's amazing that he made it to 84. Not a warm and cuddly guy.
No.
He was, a lot of people, were not fans of his. Even if you were a Republican and voted for Bush, he was always kind of this weird he was not a politician.
He was a businessman, right? He
was a businessman, and probably had some dark secret backgrounds and some spy stuff, and he was kind of a mysterious figure in a lot of ways. I remember when he left office, when Barack Obama took over for George Bush, at the inauguration, he had a leg problem, I think. I think he had to have a hip operation or something.
Okay.
So at the inauguration, when he was leaving the vice presidency, he was in a wheelchair. Oh, and I remember somebody like Jon Stewart or somebody saying if he had a cat in his lap, he would have looked like a James Bond villain.
Oh, yes. I remember that.
He would have. He definitely would have.
Right.
I mean, he kind of had that vibe.
Yeah.
And, an interesting guy. A lot of people think he's a straight up war criminal, essentially, because of, stuff in the Middle East with the war in Iraq and everything. And his old company profited quite a bit after the war. So there's a lot of shady stuff with that. But recently, in his final years, he's one of the few prominent Republicans to come out and make a stand against Donald Trump.
Right, which was pretty surprising.
It was pretty surprising. His daughter, Liz Cheney, who was a senator, was very outspoken against Donald Trump.
Right.
And Dick Cheney, in the last election, straight up said he was voting for Kamala Harris.
Right. In the first election, he supported Trump, right? So it was something.
I don't remember the first election.
I believe so, because that was kind of an interesting thing, too, that there was. Yeah. There was just a line that he said shouldn't have been crossed, and he was like, that's it. He crossed it. So,
he kind of redeemed himself in some people's eyes with that little bit at the end, but it was also kind of like at the end of Return of the Jedi where Darth Vader saves his son. Well, does that really make up for all the Darth Vader stuff that he did? It's kind of the same kind of vibe. So in honor of Dick Cheney, I thought we'd talk about vice presidents in general.
Okay.
Because this is it's a weird job because you're technically the second most powerful person in the world.
Right.
But nobody, you don't really do anything. It's so
no one remembers you.
So, it's so bizarre. One vice president said being the vice president is worse than a warm bucket of spit, and he didn't say spit. He said something else that kind of sounded like that. But it's a bizarre and fascinating thing because you could be doing nothing, and then literally one heartbeat, you could be running the entire country and with the most powerful person in the world.
And the thing is I don't remember anything about any vice president. I mean, I know a couple of them. I mean, I could give you a handful.
Well, the ones are the ones who went on to become president, essentially.
Right. Or just a little bit outspoken or some.
Sure.
But yeah, really, that's it.
So in the history of the United States, there have been 50 vice presidents. There have been more than presidents, actually, because there's. Because you had sometimes presidents change their running mates if they run for re-election. Okay. Franklin Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times, had 3 different vice presidents in his term. So there's been more vice presidents.
Oh, interesting. I thought you had to stay with that job.
No, you could change them during the election, and we've actually had 2 vice presidents resign, which we're going to talk about in a little bit too. So there have been 50 people who have been sworn in as vice president of the United States. The first vice president was John Adams, who went on to become the second president.
Right.
He was George Washington's vice president and followed him. And his vice president was Thomas Jefferson, who went on to become the third president. So you think, like, okay,
yes,
it's the vice president is the stepping stone to the
presidency.
It's
like a president in training, right?
Yeah, but it didn't really happen that way for a lot of years. And it changed. There's been a few cases of that. There have been 15 vice presidents who have gone on to become president.
Okay, that's a lower number than I would think.
Yeah, you would think, again, it would be kind of equal, like you said, it's almost like you're next in line, you're training for the job. But 9 of them became president because the president they were serving under either died or resigned. In the case of Richard Nixon, when he resigned, Gerald Ford became president. 8 presidents have died, and the vice president has taken over for them. Now, the first guy to do that was John Taylor.
Okay.
And he was the vice president that basically William Henry Harrison, who very famously died in 30 days. If you watch The Simpsons, there's a song about that. But he was the first he was the first president to die in office. So John Taylor took over as president. But at the time, this was pretty early on. William Henry Harrison was, I believe, the 10th president. So still pretty early in the country's history. It wasn't like written down like, okay, if the president dies, the vice president becomes the president.
Oh, that wasn't part of the gig? It was just
nobody knew exactly what to do. So John Tyler took it upon himself, said, you know what, I'm the president now.
Okay.
and people fought him on that, and it was kind of a big thing. And, some people he was called his accidency instead of his excellency because he kind of accidentally became president.
Right.
And he basically spent his term fighting for respect, which he never really got because he was not elected in his own right. He just kind of finished out the term and went away.
They run on the same ticket. So in my opinion, I guess, if you should vote for the vice president you like as well, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways that they go about picking who's going to be the vice president on the ticket. A lot of times, if you have a guy who's from the north, you want somebody from the south.
Yes, for sure now.
To kind of balance the ticket, to kind of appeal to different areas. Very rarely do you get 2 people from the same state on the same ticket.
Yes,
you wouldn't get 2 New Yorkers on there because you want to kind of spread things out. In the early days, whoever lost the election became the vice president.
Whoever lost the election. You mean they were running against each other?
Yeah, whoever came in second became the vice president.
Wow, that's
they
interesting.
Did that for a little while, but that got kind of messy. And that was they said, nah, that's really just leading to a lot of people fighting. So I
kind of like that. They could just duke it out for 4 years.
It would be good theater. It definitely would be good theater. So I got some interesting stories about some of the vice presidents.
Okay.
That I want to throw at you, and I think this one is probably the most famous vice president story, and largely because of a certain Broadway musical.
Okay.
But Aaron Burr was the vice president, and he shot a guy. He shot Alexander Hamilton,
right.
and went on to song for shooting Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
They had a duel back in 1804 when that
were
was
duels legal there then?
That's kind of a gray area. Kind of a gray area because they were from New York. Or they lived in New York, and they actually did the duel in New Jersey because apparently in Jersey it was okay.
Oh, okay.
Just like now, Jersey's crazy. So that's where they did the duel, but there was people said you can't do that, and that was kind of when dueling was being phased out as a thing.
They thought it was a little
they thought that was a little weird. We can't really have our vice president shooting people, and especially a guy he was the secretary of the Treasury too. So could you imagine J.D. Vance right now shooting Mark Rubio?
I'm glad we did. Yeah, I'm glad we at least moved on from that.
we have figured some things out as a democracy. We got to give ourselves some credit.
Crazy.
So but that wasn't even the weirdest thing Aaron Burr did.
Oh, okay.
Because he apparently, and there's a lot of gray area and people have different opinions on this, but he was vice president under Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. And he actually, at that point, the U.S. was really just basically the 13 colonies still, the first 13 states. Right. And, we were kind of expanding into the western part. and he wanted to take over that part of the country and like run it as his own country. So he tried to like take like half the country and say like, oh, no, I'm going to run this.
Okay, so like you guys got that. I got this.
Yeah, so like basically they were accusing him of trying to overthrow the government.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which that occasionally still does happen, but you know, so that's another subject altogether. But yeah, so
we survived all that. That's pretty good.
We survived all that, and this was pretty early on. This was, you know, in the early days, you know, these were founding fathers who were doing this, you know. And so Aaron Burr, kind of an interesting character.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Then there was John C. Calhoun, who has maybe the greatest name ever for a politician, John C. Calhoun. And if you Google him and look at a picture of him, he looks insane.
Okay.
And he might have been. He was vice president under Andrew Jackson, who was kind of nutty himself and who dueled with people too. That was a whole thing. But John C. Calhoun didn't get along with him and basically resigned the vice presidency, and he became the first person to quit.
Oh,
and he spent years attacking Jackson politically and stuff like that. They did threaten to duel each other a few times, but never actually did. So that was good.
Wow.
You know, but so he was the first guy to actually drop off, you know, to say like, I'm not going to be vice president anymore.
So they didn't always get along, right?
No, not at all.
Right?
Like I said, you know, he was, you know, somebody who finished, you know, second in the voting, and he became vice president. It was really a bizarre kind of thing. Then there, this is probably the most interesting guy, and probably maybe the most obscure guy on the list is William R. King. He was vice president under Franklin Pierce, who's a pretty obscure president. So, you know, they're both pretty obscure. William King was elected vice president. He was the running mate to Pierce, and he was on vacation in Cuba when the election happened.
Okay.
And he was sick. And he couldn't come back to the United States because he was very ill.
Okay.
So he was actually sworn in as vice president in Cuba.
Oh.
So he's the only president or vice president to be sworn in outside of the country to office. And he eventually did come back to the United States, but died very shortly after.
Oh, from his illness?
His illness, yeah. He never recovered. And so he was vice president for about 20 days and did nothing.
Half of it was in Cuba.
And half of it was in Cuba. But that's not even the most interesting thing about William King. He might be our first gay vice president.
Oh. Okay.
Because there's a lot of speculation that he was in a romantic relationships with James Buchanan, who later became president after Franklin Pierce, and who many people suspect was gay. And they think the two of them had a relationship because they did live together for several years.
Interesting.
And neither one of them ever married.
Right.
And there's a few letters that survive, and they're written very... It's tough to say because just the way people wrote and talked in the olden days is very kind of what we would think of as flowery and theatrical kind of thing. So if you read it with modern eyes, you're like, oh, these people are flirting. This is a love letter, you know? But no, it might have just been just the way people talked to each other back then. But so a lot of people think that, so William R. King, only vice president for a few days in Cuba, and might have been gay, but outside of that, you know, not too noteworthy. That was all he did.
That, like, you never know about people. Like now, you know everything. I mean, you know what they eat for breakfast.
Oh yeah.
Now it's like, wow, we didn't know about anyone. Anything, really.
You know, I mean, you know, people in the country probably didn't even know that guy existed.
Right.
He was vice president for almost a month. You know.
Yeah.
But you know, because you know, news took, you know, literally weeks to get to people and stuff like that. They might not have known he was even elected before they heard he died.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, it's kind of crazy, you know, when you think about it. You know, I mentioned earlier, you know, that Aaron Burr, of course, shot somebody, but he's not the only vice president to shoot somebody.
Oh, yes.
We getting back to Dick Cheney.
Maybe while in office. He wasn't in office, right, when that happened?
He was vice president when it happened.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. He was on vacation, and he was with his friend, a guy named Harry Wingington, I believe, and they were quail hunting.
Yes.
Right. And Dick Cheney accidentally shot his friend in the face with a shotgun.
Right.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is the guy, Harry, who got shot, in a press conference afterwards, he apologized to Dick Cheney.
For being in the way?
For being in the way.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was like, well, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess you don't want to get on Dick Cheney's bad side. So, no, you shot me. That's okay. That's okay.
That was crazy. I didn't realize he was the vice president at the time. I can't remember. I can remember that.
Yeah.
That was when his approval rating was down, I think. And that was just like the icing on the cake, right?
That did not help things. Yeah, that was kind of towards the end of their presidency, but it was still vice president. Yep. So I was talking a little bit earlier about John Tyler, who, was the first vice president to take over after a president passed away. Mm-hmm. He also has the distinction of not being the only president, because he did become president eventually, to not technically be buried in the United States.
Oh, where's
because he was in the Confederacy at the time. Because the Civil War was happening. He was from Virginia.
Okay.
And actually seceded, was working in the Confederate government when he passed away. Okay. So technically, he was not in the United States, buried in the United States, because he was buried in what was then the Confederacy.
Oh.
So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. So technically, he's a traitor, too, because he, died under, But he's not the only vice president who was a traitor during the Civil War. Yeah, there's some colorful characters here. John Breckinridge, who was the youngest vice president ever. He was 35 years old. And he was president. He was, I believe, he was not. I can't remember what president he's from, but but he was vice president before the Civil War. And when he was from the South, and when the Civil War happened, he went and fought for the South and was a general in the Southern Army. And he actually fled the country and lived the rest of his life in exile because he was considered a traitor.
How did he get to be the vice president? That's the thing.
Well, this was before the Civil War. He was vice president before.
I'm sorry. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So, and then after he was vice president.
Yeah, then he went with the Confederacy.
He went with the Confederacy.
Yeah,
okay, gotcha.
And,
so it wasn't like, that's what I was saying. He was not.
Yeah,
he was not a traitor until after.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly. The only one who might have been a traitor while he was vice president was Aaron Burr, who might have tried to overthrow the government. Maybe. It's debatable.
Right.
So the other interesting one, and there's a lot of interesting stories, but Spiro Agnew, who was the vice president under Richard Nixon.
Yeah, I always like that name. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. Yeah. He's the only other vice president to resign. Now, he didn't resign because he didn't get along with Richard Nixon. He was in trouble because he had taken bribes.
Oh.
Before he was vice president, he was governor of Maryland, and he was accused of accepting bribes, and apparently was still getting bribes sent to him while he was vice president. And so he had to resign, and what's fascinating about that is he resigned about a year and a half before Richard Nixon resigned. If Richard Nixon's scandal would have broke first, he would have been
president and then had to resign.
Yeah.
This is all making me feel very comforted, because if the democracy could have withstood all of this,
we've had a lot of we're going through a lot of nonsense now, but we've had nonsense before.
Yeah, I'm like, it's actually kind of comforting that we survived all of this.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Now I mentioned how 15 vice presidents became president eventually, but a lot of vice presidents also tried to run for president too. And didn't, and failed. Most recently, Kamala Harris, of course, she was vice president.
Do you have the numbers on that? I'm wondering how many numbers. No,
there's a few. There's a few, but I mean, Al Gore, you mentioned earlier.
In the recent years.
He was of course vice president. Walter Mondale was vice president of Jimmy Carter. He ran against Jimmy Carter against Ronald Reagan.
I remember that. That's like the first election I remember.
And he got destroyed in that election.
Exactly.
Richard Nixon, when he was vice president under Eisenhower, ran against John Kennedy and lost in 1960 very famously, and then eventually did come back in 1968 and win the presidency.
Right.
So a very fascinating thing. And now the one really, really maybe most interesting in terms of how he got there, vice president, was Gerald Ford. Because as I mentioned, Spiro Agnew resigned. And they used to just leave, if the vice president passed away, they just didn't bother replacing them. That was like the policy. So there's large gaps in our history where we technically did not have a vice president. But after, numerous presidents died, they said, you know what, we really actually need a vice president because what if the president dies too? So they passed a law in the 60s that we had to pick a new vice president if a vice president died or resigned. So when Spiro Agnew resigned, they got Gerald Ford. They brought him in, and he was appointed vice president.
Okay.
So he wasn't elected, and then he became president after Nixon resigned. So
he was not elected.
He was not. He was never elected vice president or president. He's the only person to serve as vice president and president and not be elected to the office.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting.
How did people feel about that?
At the time, there was just so much nonsense with Watergate going on and everything that everybody's just like, you know what, he seems all right. Let's just go with him. Yeah, let's go with a few of them. So the most recent vice president to become president is Joe Biden, of course.
Right.
He was vice president under Obama. And didn't run when Obama's term ended. Of course, Hillary Clinton ran against Donald Trump.
Right, which was an odd choice, I thought.
He didn't run because his son had recently passed away just before the end of his term as vice president.
Oh, right.
And he just said he wasn't in the right headspace. And of course, Hillary Clinton ran, lost to Donald Trump. And then Biden came back in 2020 to run against Trump and beat him.
Right.
And then, of course, it was very controversial. Recent history. This is the most recent history in terms of vice presidents trying, maybe taking over and stuff. People were worried about Joe Biden's health and mental abilities.
Yeah.
And he was going to run for re-election, would have won the nomination essentially, but then stepped down, and his vice president was appointed essentially to take over, and that's when Kamala Harris went on the ticket. So she didn't actually take over for president. That's a little weird because she didn't
over to run for president.
Run for president. Yeah, and then of course obviously lost.
Party, right. I know, and I will often wonder how much of a difference the vice president does make on the ticket, in just an initial. Because when she was choosing her vice president, I remember being kind of obsessed with it. I don't know why, but there was, I can't remember his name because I'm terrible with politics. But he was the astronaut. She was going to, he was on her.
Yes.
He was a candidate. And I was like, pick the astronaut.
That's so cool.
I just thought, if you're going to pick a vice president, nobody really cares that much about them. Pick someone that did something pretty cool.
Yeah.
But,
I'm going to run through a list of some of the vice presidents who became president. And there's some obscure names, but there's some big names in history too that started. So I mentioned John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, of course. They're well-known founding father types. We have Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. He was vice president, became president when McKinley was assassinated. You have Harry Truman, who became when Franklin Roosevelt died, of course, became one of our better presidents. Most people feel. Richard Nixon, of course, went on to become president later, as I mentioned earlier. And we had George H.W. Bush, who became president and then had a son who became president, which is interesting because John Adams also had a son who became president.
Oh, right.
So, there's John Quincy Adams and, of course, George Bush. So it's kind of – there's the only father-son combinations in presidential history. The fathers both started as vice presidents.
Right.
So really weird, quirky stuff in history.
Yes, really. Very interesting.
So just to kind of wrap things up, looking at the most recent vice presidents, of course, J.D. Vance is the president now.
The vice president.
And there's a lot of debate on whether he's going to be a candidate, whether or not Trump might try to run again, which technically he can't.
He can't, right.
It's technically certain things, but
I know, right.
We don't know. We don't know. Right. We talked about Kamala Harris, and there was Mike Pence, who was, of course, vice president under Trump the first time, who very famously had a feud with him at the end.
Yes,
during the January 6th insurrection, people wanted to hang him.
Yeah, that was scary.
Or people actually chanting "hang him," and they stormed the Capitol. So he wasn't friends with Trump after that.
No, I think he felt like that was.
He's like, what?
Where was the support? A little bit.
He's like, listen. I'll go along with a lot of things.
Right, I was your wingman, but.
But it's kind of interesting because the one job that the vice president has is presiding over the Senate. And if there's a tie, because there's 100 senators, if there's a tie, the vice president can cast the tie-breaking vote.
Oh, right. That's right.
So, and that has happened a couple of times. Kamala Harris had to do it a couple of times because the Senate was kind of like 50-50 at that point between Democrats and Republicans. But, and one of the things that they do is overseeing the Senate is certifying the election. Right. Now, that's supposed to be a formality because the election, like, here's the numbers.
Like everybody kind of
just sign this, kind of thing.
It, right.
And, Trump did not want him to sign it.
Yeah.
And he said, don't certify the election. And he's like, well, I got to. That's
my job, right?
I literally have like two things to do. Be here if you die and sign this piece of paper. And I'm going to sign this piece of paper. And it's very funny because if the vice president loses the election, if like in Kamala Harris's thing, she had to sign the paper that said she lost the election.
Oh,
which is kind of that's kind of messed up.
Yeah,
that's a little.
She could have been like, "No, I'm not going to certify this. Sorry."
She's like, "Let's circle back to the last time how things went because I seem to remember a lot of noise going on around that." Yeah. So who's your favorite vice president? Do you have a favorite? I
mean, I don't really. Like I said, they were kind of like a non-event to me.
Yeah.
I don't remember like being, enamored with anyone really. Do you have one?
I think it's funny. I think Joe Biden, when he was vice president under Obama, was hysterical because he just kind of said whatever he thought.
Right. I do remember that. Yeah.
He kind of had a thing. Yeah. There was, and he would drive around and he had like a fancy Mustang. He would drive around in with his sunglasses. He was Joe Cool kind of thing.
And he was the opposite. They were a good match because Obama was so polished and so, just said the right things. And Joe was like the, Yeah. Joe
was kind of impulsive.
Yeah, that was a good match. I think the match is important, the dynamic between the two.
No, I definitely do think that is. Dan Quayle was probably the funniest because he kind of did a lot of dumb things. He was he was kind of plucked from obscurity and became vice president under the first George Bush.
Right. I don't really remember him, though, to be honest.
He famously misspelled the word potato, put an E at the end of it, and got mad at Murphy Brown for getting pregnant and apparently didn't know she was a fictional character. But he was kind of fun. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a good vice president, although it's tough again to judge good or bad because they don't really do much.
I mean,
they're just kind of there.
Stand there.
That's the job I want because I would be good at that. I could do nothing for a living.
Sure.
Thank you for listening to The Last Radio Show. If you like the show, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on your favorite platform. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at The Last Radio Show. We will talk to you soon.
The Last Radio Show.
The Last Radio Show.